Well, I'm Hewitt, class of 2019, double majoring in history and Black studies.
Awesome. Cool. And I am Laura Tascula, class of 2017, and I was an English major. So could you just start off by talking about where you were when you heard about the uprising?
I want to say that I was in my room, and I think I heard about it from social media. I think there may have been a Facebook event, but if there wasn't, there were definitely a lot of Facebook posts. And I was coming from a boarding school where activism was really not popular. Definitely like in the way that activism can operate as a form of social currency at Amherst, that wasn't the case at Exeter. And but I nonetheless did it at Exeter, so I was really excited when I heard about the sit-in. And I think as soon as I heard about it, I went through to the library.
And you were like, I'm going.
Yeah.
So that was kind of your initial thought. Did you have any class conflicts that might have been coming up?
I think I was in class when it started, and then when I got out of class, I think I saw a lot of people heading to the library, but just thought it was like the beginning of the year. People were, or it was fall, and I feel like fall is like the study season. So I just figured people were going in to study as usual, and then went to my room, got on Facebook, and then
saw it was going there.
Yeah.
Great. And then can you talk about what you saw kind of when you went in the library, like the presence, what people were doing, and what you saw, and what your thoughts were about what you were seeing?
I saw a lot of people, which was cool to have a lot of bodies in the space. When I arrived, not as many people were taking to the mic. I heard that during the first hour or two that happened a lot, and that those moments were really, really powerful for people. And by the time that I arrived, there seemed to be somewhat of a lull in what was going on. When people did grab the mic, what was said didn't feel as powerful to me. I think by that time already some folks were in the CHI, that's what it's called, right? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The CHI and on the second floor, planning out some demands. I think the atmosphere really changed as each day passed and as each hour passed. And that's like a big thing for me. When I first arrived, I think I was pretty excited and happy to see that something was happening and that people at Amherst were really politically and socially engaged.
Yeah.
As a freshman at the time, I didn't feel equipped to put forth any demands. So I didn't go upstairs. I just kind of like let my body sit there in an act of solidarity. But I remember being disappointed when the demands came out. That's something I remember.
Yeah. Can you say more about that?
One of the demands was protection from ACPD. I think a lot of the demands were apologies from administrators. And those are symbolic gestures, and I'm not saying they're not important to demand. I think that the student body, or at least a significant portion of the socially and politically involved student body at this point, would make a very different demand of ACPD. Rather than protect us more, stay away from us.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really interesting point to make. Did you have any conversations about how you were reacting to the demands with people, or was it kind of like your own disappointment individually?
I think I kind of sat with it in myself. I think a lot of folks started to be more atomized as Amherst Uprising went on. Like people came through to the library, but it was fewer and fewer folks with less and less of a sense of direction and purpose. And I think at a certain point I stopped coming as well. And I think I processed that very individually. And a part of that was at the time I was friends with like a lot of people who were seniors. And I think they had a lot of cynicism that became contagious for me. And the freshmen I was friends with didn't really have the same framework to understand the moment, I think, in the way that I was trying to understand it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And you said that eventually you left too.
Yeah.
Did you spend the night that first night, or
I did?
You did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the second. I think they did it for a few nights.
Yeah.
There was actually one moment that stood out to me, and I think was a big part of why I left. There were cops patrolling
at night.
Yeah, at night.
Oh,
Cops patrolling across the library, and that I remember it felt weird to me, but I didn't necessarily have the same language or ideological framework to name what rubbed me the wrong way about it as I would now. But I remember seeing that felt really strange, and then I was kind of like in this row sleeping in this row of mostly non-Black people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of them, or at least a significant portion of them, thanked one of the white female cops who was walking by us. I think that was either late at night or in the morning. And I think I felt pressured to thank them too. And I'm not sure if I actually said thank you, or if I just like thought I should.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember after that moment kind of feeling disgusted.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, definitely contributed to
why you left. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really intense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the moments, like the sit-in and the sleepover part of it, before that moment of like the conversations that happened late at night from the people that decided to stay and occupy Frost?
Yeah. I remember people were kind of getting into these little circles, either with friends or acquaintances throughout the library. And it felt like those conversations, in a sense, it felt like those conversations were even more fruitful than the official conversations that were taking place at the mic,
yeah,
or upstairs in the CHI.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a part of maybe why is like when you're in this circle with only people that you know, and you know you're not being recorded or taking the pictures and being taken, all of this stuff, you're gonna be more real. And even if what you say is fucked up and not right, or like ideologically reactionary, all this stuff, it's honest.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't feel wrapped up in social capital. And I felt like the microphone and the upstairs room felt very wrapped up in social capital in a way that I couldn't fully name at the time, but in a way that rubbed me the wrong way.
Interesting. Yeah. That being out in the open and like the eyes on you situation kind of.
And the profile pictures. And
yes.
And the saying that you were a part of the upstairs group. And,
yeah. Wow. Yeah. Damn.
Yeah.
Can you talk about any other conversations that stick out in your mind, kind of maybe with either staff or faculty or other students, either from the days that you were there or once you left, or kind of the days following?
Yeah, a lot of people wanted to write articles.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think naming that impulse for Amherst College students for knowledge production, some kind of written material is really interesting. Also, there was a conversation I had with a student staff member at the time who was a senior, who worked in Frost Cafe. And she wasn't officially on the clock, but her supervisor kind of basically asked her to be on the clock. Just like kind of on the fly.
Right.
And at first, her response was no, like my shift isn't now. But I think he just said her name and looked at her, and then she got on the clock. And something that she complained about was, I want to say like Dean Vasquez or like another administrator asked her to prepare drinks for people who were in the upstairs room. And she was like, okay, like bottles of water, like, is that cool?
Yeah.
And then they asked for like Nantucket or Snapples or something fancier. And I remember her reacting really negatively to that, and my understanding why she was. And that just being like a moment for me of, what is this becoming, and in what ways is this moment going to be institutionally memorialized, and why and how? Yeah.
In that moment. Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you say more about how you think about that now with some distance too?
So I think about those drinks also in the context of an administrator opening up a tab for students for at least one of the days from Frost Cafe. And it reminds me of like a year or so later, I was participating in a demonstration against the administration's response to the Muslim ban. And something that someone who was training us told us to prepare for was being offered cookies. Like, you're going to go into this office and they're going to offer you cookies. Yeah. Say no. And sure enough, when we went into the president's office to begin a sit-in, y'all want some cookies?
Yeah. Wow. And do you remember the timeline when the Muslim ban protest was? I remember being there too, but I can't remember.
I think that was my sophomore spring, mid-spring.
So soonish after the uprising. Yeah. Wow. Can you say more about the activism that followed? Because I know you're pretty active. Are you in direct action?
Coordinating.
Yeah. So can you talk about maybe how Uprising shaped or didn't shape, or kind of set the stage for that group, or kind of your own interactions with activism following Amherst Uprising?
For sure. Yeah. So I think like immediately after Amherst Uprising, during my freshman year, I walked away not knowing how to feel, not knowing what to think. being really happy that people were involved
Yeah.
and wanted to do something and that bodies showed up. Being unsure of how to feel about the open tab, you know, the Snapple and,
Right.
you know, the glass bottles, the self-care stations with baby wipes and lotion, like all of these things.
Yes.
Something felt strange about it in a way that I couldn't name.
Mm-hmm.
The demands, the cops. And so then I just kind of like retreated to my room. In the winter, I had a bad breakup and I was just kind of like, but I think that was really important for me because I just read a bunch of theory. Not that like theory is that useful. You know, without practice, it isn't anything.
Right.
But at the time, it was useful for me. Immediately after Uprising, I retreated to my room, read a lot of theory, and just kind of dejected, I think, from like the resource centers, all of these other spaces, and like traditional social scenes, which I think was good for me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other students who eventually came together to form DAC were doing similar things, freshman, spring. And then sophomore, fall, you know, I tried to do a little bit of work with Amherst United Left, which was still active at the time. Was really disappointed that, to be frank, it seemed like a bunch of cis boys reading Marx together and not actually doing anything. And that got really boring and tedious for me. And somehow just like the pieces came together to where me and a bunch of other folks with similar politics were in a room. I want to say 10 to 20 people, preparing to form a horizontalist student organizing vehicle that could do radical actions from a radical theoretical framework. And like we started meeting on occasion, and then it turned into the Muslim ban protest. Actually, before that, we had the DACA protest.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to say my sophomore fall, late. And then we just started meeting and then doing a lot of off-campus organizing, which I think has taught us the most. And I think if anything, Amherst Uprising taught us that we have to be careful with the ways in which liberalism can pervade our movements, can warp our movements. You know, there's kind of an official institutionalized memory of Amherst Uprising, but not for the DACA protest and not for the Muslim ban.
Right.
And the demands for the Muslim ban protest were met within 24 hours.
I remember that.
Yeah. And there was a lot of hostility between us and the administration, but sometimes hostility is necessary.
Right.
You know, obviously there's negotiation plays a role in all organizing, but I'm just like thinking about like ideologies of like social capital, liberalism, like how all of these things can come together to make or break a movement.
Yeah. Wow. Can you say more about kind of any changes that you might have seen? You were only here for a couple of months when Uprising happened, but changes that you've seen, that you saw after Uprising or that you've seen over the course of your 4 years? You touched on it a little bit, but say more about maybe personal interactions and things like that, or experiences in the classroom following Uprising.
For sure. Definitely ODI, SICE. I also think CDSL is new.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, if it's not a direct response to Uprising, it kind of flowered out of it.
Yeah.
I was friends and like organized with someone who graduated last year, I want to say. I'm just not naming them because I don't know if they don't want to be named.
That's cool.
Who said that they were part of some kind of committee structure in the wake of Uprising that a year after it had ended self-dissolved because people stopped coming. It wasn't really doing anything. So I think like we see some institutionalized mechanisms coming in as a response, but then kind of a lack of sustained organizing follow-up, which is also noteworthy. I think there's definitely been a culture change. I think white liberal professors are a little bit scared of students of color, and yes, obviously that's always going to be racialized, but not necessarily in a negative way, but in the sense of like students of color are ready to reclaim their power, you know, power that they should have in the first place, and that can be a frightening prospect. So that's kind of cool to see. And just amongst the student body, I don't know. Again, I don't know what it was like before I came through here, but at Exeter, saying Black Lives Matter was a controversial statement. And I think now that is very mainstream, and someone can say Black Lives Matter and still do something messed up or anti-Black. So that's interesting to think through, but definitely there's been a culture shift.
Great. Yeah. And another thing, you've touched on this institutional memory and the ways that uprising is being remembered, but as someone in the class, the last class to have been there, can you talk more about that legacy and kind of what you hope that students will continue to take away and kind of how it might be remembered in your ideal situation?
I think Amherst Uprising is a symbol of revolt and of doing something. And I think those two things are important. I hope that, because I feel like there are these kind of two divergent models of so-called activism in Amherst. And I think that's why I like to call myself an organizer and not an activist. Because one is Instagram posts, profile pictures, Facebook posts, all these things. And I'm not saying doing those things alongside other things is useless.
Right.
But it's like when you're only doing those things and then not doing the 3 to 4 hour meetings on Sundays. Yeah. Agenda planning, note taking, the kind of grunt work. That's very invisibilized but necessary.
Right.
And so I'm hopeful that more and more students are attracted to that less glamorous grunt work and not allured by the potential rewards, material and otherwise, of stating that drinking a latte is revolutionary. Me and my friends, we have like this joke because we got like bubble tea a few weeks ago, and I was joking like, each time a piece of boba enters my mouth as a trans black man, it is an act of resistance against white supremacy, against heteropatriarchy. I have my ancestors' promise. They would be so proud to see me. It's like, and like obviously that's an exaggeration, but some people are saying things like that.
Right.
And it's like, is it really revolutionary to be at one of the most elite liberal arts institutions on the planet and to prepare to be taking a job with a financial institution or in the nonprofit industrial complex afterwards? Everyone has to sell their labor in some way. I'm going to go work for a nonprofit afterwards. But it's like, be self-critical about it.
Be aware of it.
And so like, I think those two divergent memories exist of like kind of a mainstream social media based activism and kind of a quiet invisibilized labor organizing.
Right.
And both are useful. Publicity matters. But I hope people don't veer towards only the rewards and also do the work that is sometimes just super taxing.
Right. And behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really important point to remember. Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. That was really, really great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing with us.
For sure.